It starts with an idea, the answer to a question, really. How can we best defend ourselves?
So when we start a weapon, what we do is first a very, very high-level write-up, which discusses the key beats, the manufacturer, what type of weapon it is. From there, we approve that, and then that goes into the actual kickoff meeting, where we run through that document. We talk about what we're trying to hit as far as those major key beats, and so when the concept is being worked on, it is purely about those things, and we make sure that if everything else falls to the wayside, we hit those three things.
The weapons pipeline is a very traditional content pipeline, so what we create is a piece of content. It doesn't have much, there's no gameplay logic that ties back to all the other areas. It's a weapon. It's a fairly contained piece of art with effects and animation, and it's complex in itself.
You know, the Bearing P8 AR, the assault rifle, was kind of the one we chose to be, right, this is going to be the new gold standard. We knew right off the bat, you know, we wanted something quite slick. It shouldn't be too fancy, but, you know, it's going to be in squadrons, so, you know, we want it to have some interest. It's going to be a mix of alloy and polymers, and that was kind of our initial direction. You know, obviously working off an M16 sort of silhouette, sort of proportions, so that's your sort of starting ground, basically.
After we get our hands on a concept, we tend to compare it to our replicas of guns that we have in the office. We tend to check the buttstock length, the thickness of the gun, the trigger guard, to make sure that a character with a heavy armor can actually fit his fingers into the trigger guard. We check the accessibility of the handguard, if it is not too far away or not too close to the player. Same goes for the mag release and safety. So we check all these, and if needed, we adjust the concept. Afterwards, we create a blockout, which is a very simplified version of the in-game model, which basically consists just of a few blocks of geometry. This is used mainly for pre-visualizations. After the blockout is done, we send it to the animators and riggers, and we start to work on the actual in-game mesh, which is way more advanced than the blockout.
Then tech art can bring up any concerns that they might have, weapon art can bring up any concerns that they might have, audio, so on and so forth. So all the way through the pipeline. So we have representatives for every single department in that kickoff meeting that can ask questions to myself or the designer that has worked on these weapons.
After gathering all the information, we start our own process. First is a weapon pre-visualization setup. Second one is with a final render mesh implementation, and third one is optimization of level of detail. We call it LODs. We create the Maya rig for the animators, and we provide all sort of controls for its mechanism. Then we hand it over to animators.
When you're firing a weapon, if it has moving parts, we have to animate those parts. The main focus for animation is actually getting the reloads working. As the reloads in any first-person game are important to how the weapon feels. It's getting the weight of the weapon, the timing. It needs to feel like a realistic reload. And then obviously in Star Citizen, we've got the combined first-person and third-person animations. So you've got the unique challenge of what you see in first-person and third-person is the same thing, but in first-person you need to have a good read on what's happening. So you've got some restrictions where you have to keep the weapon in the view of the camera. If you drop that out to reload, then the player's going to, wonder, where's the weapon gone?
And so just putting all these pieces together, just making, just the basics, The grip isn't too big, the finger can go in a neutral rest position and when it's not on the trigger. Branding, materials, does it look good from third person, does it look good from first person?
We create a weapon character definition file which contains 4 data types. First one is a skeleton, and plus its physics. Second one is a skin file, which contains its deformation parts. And third one is static geometry, which we call as a CGF. Fourth one are a null attachment helpers, which works with our weapon customization, as well as certain helpers for the VFX. After this stage, our game skeleton for the weapon is ready. Then we create another internal file, which we call character parameters, where we connect animation database to its respective skeleton. And then animators can go in and start exporting their animation. Final product as a building block pre-visualization weapon looks something like this inside the engine.
I mean, way back in the day, like when we were doing the first sort of weapons, there were all sorts of things, different sizes. You know. Now we're working far more with templates, basically. So it used to be that the animation department was less involved. So because we were just making cool weapons. Do you know what I mean? We were just we're being artists, and we're like, yeah, this is cool. But really, it needed more involvement from all other parties.
Once Tech Art send us the rig, the first thing we do is we put it onto our animation pose and just check that the pivot point of the weapon sits correctly in the hand. Everything's good, it's shouldered, the first person view and the third person view are looking right. If the weapon has many moving parts, we'll check that all those are set up correctly. Sometimes they aren't, and then we feed back to Tech Art and then it comes back to us again. This is G36, so it's hand positions are close in. So this is the pose that we give Art to model around. So they'll model this part of the gun so that it fits, but then the left hand, we have to adjust it per weapon. So the PAR, for example, is a longer weapon, so instead of holding it back here, the first thing we'll do is we'll adjust this and we'll get a hand pose that we're happy with. And we get that in engine as early as possible so that we know where the animation's going to have to start from for the reload. So once we're happy with the hand pose, then we can move on to doing the first pass of the reloads. After we've done a few, iterations, tested some timing out and stuff, and once we're happy with that, that's when we move on to implementing it into Mannequin, which is the sort of the part of the engine that the game's going to read like the animation from, the fragments and stuff. So code will usually set those up or design, and then animation will go in and fill in the animations that are needed. So you'll have different reloads for stand, crouch, prone, but we always try and make sure that the timing's the same on each, because obviously you don't want a penalty for being in crouch. Whereas in most first-person games, you'd have the same reload across all states, because it's actually just a floating pair of arms, or it's just a fixed body. So we always concentrate just on the stand, forward, reload. After it's in Mannequin, we can get it in engine. That's when the design guys and art and any director that needs to review it can start seeing it, you can play with it. Usually the first iteration's relatively rough because you want to get that in quickly so that people can start feeding back on it as early as possible.
Once art and animation have done their first pass, we put that all into the file and verify it's all working in game. It hasn't changed massively since the original test we did, because quite often if you use one gun and set it up as behaving like another one, it feels very different if it hasn't got the right assets on it. Sort of the visual style and sound and animations of the gun can massively impact the feel of how people perceive it to be working. It's all just very subtle shifts in increasing the rate of fire, but keeping the same recoil values can massively change how something feels because it just slowly additively stacks. So you change one number a small amount, and after you fired 50 rounds, your gun's 45 degrees pointed further away than where you were before.
So now when we get feedback from animators, we address the feedback to the actual in-game model, and we apply then so-called custom normals, which basically means that all the hard edges are beveled, and in the end it makes the gun look way more beautiful because all the hard edges are nice and smooth and round in it. And after that is done and optimizations on the model are done, we do this thing called UVing. UVing is basically opposite of what making a paper model is. So instead of starting off from 2D sheet of paper and making it into the model. We start with the model and then unfold it nicely into a 2D sheet for texturing. After this, decals and pump decals are applied, which basically add a small stickers or markings on the gun. And the pump decals really enhance the visuals of the weapon by adding a small details that actually bend the light. There are also unique textures applied to the model, which enhance the look of the weapon as well as functionality. These are called wear map and a dirt map. These are hand painted or photo sourced to ensure the highest quality. And basically they add dirt and wear. However, these can be controlled by code in real time, so we can control the intensity and amount of the dirt and wear dynamically in engine.
Every weapon in the game has a muzzle flash, ballistic weapons and energy weapons. That's sort of the main distinction of the weapons now. It's energy or ballistic. So each weapon has like, 4 parts? And it doesn't matter if it's a ballistic weapon or an energy weapon. Muzzle flash, projectile, impacts, and the tracer. And the impacts is a huge thing in itself, because we want to do different impact effects per surface. So if you shoot ice, you should be able to see ice fragments coming up. And if you're shooting at metal, yeah, we're talking about sparks. And then dust from shooting cloth, water, and how will we deal with the different planets? Like we have brown sand, red sand, black sand, and it's just going to be crazy. But that's so cool with this product, this game, because the level of detail that every department wants to add to it, it's just very inspiring.
Once a weapon has been built and, maybe it's got, it gets to audio, normally animations are done, gets to audio, and audio are sort of putting their thinking on it. Generally, they've been, it's been, spot on. It's kind of like a linear pipeline. It hasn't come back and influenced the design, but, we do have weapons that are coming up where the choices that they'll make will definitely influence the sort of feel of the weapon and the weight of the weapon.
A certain weapon might sound different from a first-person perspective to give you a kind of more subjective, a deeper subjective experience of firing that weapon. And then it sounds different again from a third person. So that if you hear your weapon being fired by an enemy down the hall or whatever, it'll be different from, to try and reflect the fact that when you fire a weapon yourself, probably in real life, we don't get to do that much in the UK, thankfully, you'll get that kick that you wouldn't necessarily have the audio for. In the old days, you would have like 1 or 2 sound effects for guns, let's say. We've got layers and multiple layers, and then in those layers are multiple grains. It's all essentially like, almost granular resynthesis, really. It's quite deep, it's quite painstaking, and it has its own technical challenges. If you were, say, lining all that stuff up in Reaper, then all the transients, the initial pop, you could line them up manually, and that all works fine. If you're trying to randomize these things, so these different layers are working in tandem, almost like an orchestra, you need to try to make sure they all line up as well, otherwise you get this smearing effect, and it kind of muddies the waters, if you like, the audio where guns are concerned. So trying to work out exactly how you deconstruct and reconstruct stuff is a large part of what we're still doing. We're still trying to improve that process. It's similar to music in a way. Music does a similar thing. That's based more on logic. This is more based on where you are. And also stuff, like I said, like first person, whether it's you shooting or somebody else. A lot of these things vary at runtime. And the idea is hopefully you won't really notice it too much. That's why I think it's slightly taken for granted, the audio thing, because when it works, it just seems natural, and that's what we're aiming for. If you haven't fired a gun for a while, and you bring it up and you fire it again, that initial punch that you get from it will be louder than if, like, 2 seconds from that point, you fire it again. So there are little dynamic mix systems that work, to try and make it pop through that bit more. That's what game sound designers do. I think that's why it's an interesting challenge compared to movie sound design. Is that we're trying to come up with systems, and we still have that authorship, we still sound design, we still put, we still do that creative stuff, but it's married to this technical challenge, which makes it so much more, to me, so much more interesting than movie sound design.
That's pretty much the process that we take, and then yes, that's when we sort of go right. Or I think I go right, I think I'm done, and then it passes on to the next part of the pipeline. Because it's not just visuals, right? It's the whole holistic thing. It's VFX, it's the audio, really giving the punch of that weapon. Fans expect a certain level of quality, and that all feeds into it. Everything works as it should, basically.
It started with an idea. Now it's yours to fire.